Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming here today to the Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee. We're hearing Interim Study 16059. It's a study that explores the different methods and means to improve the Department of Corrections structure, procedures, and morale. The study is being offered by Representative John Bennett, who will be here momentarily, but to get things started, I'm going to go to the first presenter. He wanted me to begin, and that first presenter is former Representative Gus Blackwell. You are recognized, Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Members, guests. We want to look today a little bit about Department of Corrections, some things we can do to hopefully improve efficiencies, improve morale. They've done yeoman's work the last several years in very difficult circumstances. As we've seen the amount of inmates increase to a high of about 117% of capacity. Under new leadership and direction, we've got that down to about 103%. But still, during that time of a large increase in the amount of inmates that they're looking, we also saw about a drop of 1,000 employees in the last 10 years. So while they're looking at 4,000 more inmates than they did in 2006, they've got 1,000 less employees to do that. So you can see quite the strain that it puts upon individuals, both in terms of stress, workload, and on the infrastructure. So we want to look at a couple different ways. I'm going to lead off with the introduction, some parameters of the study. We're going to have Jackie Schweitzer, who's a membership representative from Oklahoma Corrections Professionals Association of Officers and Staff from the Department of Corrections, that is going to look at one of the the best response we had of what would you like to see change, which would be different type of uniform. And he's going to look at the uniform policy. We're going to hear from Director Albaugh, who's made several changes to help change the direction of the agency, the tone of the agency. He made some great moves that have worked out tremendously well. Representative Osborne is going to be here to present some pay band structures, and then Representative Bennett would do a conclusion, sum it up. So first of all, we want to look at just recruitment and retention, and realize that we're doing an abysmal job there. The recruitment, the retention for officers is about 39%. There's several reasons for this. One is that it is a very high-stress job. I don't think a lot of people get into it. They don't realize just the amount of stress that you do undergo in terms of the amount of workload that you have, what you have to do to help and keep inmates in line. Many times, because of the low officer count, people would have to work 2-3 doubles a week. Director Albaugh's instituted some changes to make sure that is not occurring, and the people that are working overtime are doing so at their own request and their own decision. So that's one of the things that is difficult. Also, because of the low pay, they are attracting those that are probably not the best suited to do that. Because of the high turnover rate, also we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. A lot of officers that have been there for quite a while can provide guidance, direction for new officers and for those who are moving up the chain of command. So hopefully we'll be able to change that with some changes in the training that Director Albaugh is starting to put in to make the training a little bit more uniform, to make it ongoing. And we'll look at if the less hours will also be able to bring down the high turnover rate. The high turnover rate in and of itself is a cost factor. If you're training 40% of new officers every year, you know that the amount of money you've put in to train them is just being wasted. So we know that after about 2 years, if they stay for 2 years, they're going to probably stay at least 10 years. So we need to look at some different ways we can continue to work on recruitment and retention. Another thing we want to look at then along with that is recognizing correctional officers as law enforcement. I know a lot of times, and I'm saying this to the journalists in the room, write articles and refer to them as guards. You don't refer to highway patrol as car stoppers, but that's what they do. They stop cars and write tickets. You don't refer to officers as guards. They're law enforcement. They're recognized law enforcement. Up until about several years ago, they were commissioned law enforcement. We'd like to have that reinstituted. That was taken away by a director that felt like that could add cost if they were having to be CLEAT certified. What we'd like to do is have those officers that are already CLEAT certified recognized as commissioned law enforcement. There's several benefits to this. It adds no cost to the agency. We're not stipulating that anyone become CLEAT certified, but if they are CLEAT certified, they can be commissioned as law enforcement. There's no problem with them being sued, the DOC being sued when they're off duty, because they are off duty. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at to help those people and the public in general recognize and be aware that they are law enforcement. Another thing we need to look at is give the director or wardens the ability to waive some of the educational requirements for positions at facilities. For example, I was talking to the warden at Mabel Bassett. She said that to get someone in to be an instructor for physical activity, phys ed, they had to have a master's degree, yet they were going to make about $20,000 a year. And so trying to get someone in with a master's degree to make $20,000 is impossible. And so as a result, of course, that position had not been filled, was not filled, and probably won't be filled as long as that requirement stays in place. One of the other things we want to look at is, besides the recruitment, retention, COs as commissioned officer, is different ways to reduce the inmate count and get the officer count up. We do that by the recruitment and retention. To reduce the inmates, one of the things we've got to work on is our recidivism rate. Right now, about 25% of the people who come in are those that have violated probation or parole in some form or fashion. One of the things we use for this is halfway houses. In fact, current statute requires that your last 6 months within an institution that you go to a halfway house. Now, this is bypassed in a couple different ways. One is they don't apply your good time credits in real time. So when they apply that you're doing a 3-for-1 stint or a 2-for-1 stint, you've only got 2 years left, but you've got a 4-for-1 count. By the time they apply that, it may be that you have no time left and they just send you out of the door of the minimum security prison. So we've got to really look at that at real time to move to halfway houses. Now, the problem with halfway houses, as we've seen in recent newspaper articles, is that the private entities that run these don't do a very good job. Just this year we saw that one had an escape hatch, a false wall put into one of the facilities where the people there could just walk in and out anytime they wanted. Saw last couple years in Avalon facilities in Tulsa, Fight Club. And so one of the things that I'm proposing and ask the department to look at is that DOC itself begin to run halfway houses and look at that, to put in appropriate programs to get them their driver's license, everything they need, GED certificates, so when they get out and they're on their own, they've already had the necessary tools to get a job, continue with their life, and they don't have to wait to get all those things. That's the purpose of the halfway house. As it's being served now, the recidivism rate at halfway house is not even any lower than it is at a minimum. I think DOC itself could do a much better job with that. We see that with the transition of the work centers to OSR. A recent decision made by the DOC board, and the director is providing work details for, I believe, at least 14 different towns and locales in that area of Granite, and working tremendously. They have much better programs to be able to participate in and to help them. So one of the things I would really recommend is that we look at DOC taking over halfway houses instead of using just private entities that at this time are not doing a great job. One of the other thing we want to look at is the infrastructure. You may read recently in the news that they didn't have water pipe broke at a prison down at Lexington. Luckily, they were prepared for that. They had water trucks come in, had water there, provided for all the things that were gone because of the busted water pipe. With that, though, they found that some of the valves were also aging and had to be replaced. So right now, DOC is just working day to day on an emergency basis when something breaks, a chiller at OSP, water line at Lark, hoping to have the money and the resources to be able to deal with that emergency. Many of these facilities are over hundreds of years old. They were not designed to be prisons, and so as a result, the added strain upon the infrastructure makes it difficult for them to accommodate that. For example, one of the ones that we just had a water line break at was designed to accommodate 1,200. It was a couple hundred over that at the time. So you can see that with 103% capacity within the prison, there is a huge strain upon the infrastructure. With an addition of North Fork at Sayre, we're able to add a very new facility with updated infrastructure to help us. But we need to be able to have a fund, sort of like higher ed does, to go into a master lease program where they can regularly update equipment that needs to be updated or they know will soon fail, instead of waiting for it to fail, an emergency to develop, and then to try and respond to that. Part of that, too, would be to put the information technology, the IT department, which was moved out of DOC to OMS to save money. It's really not saving the state money. It's not helping DOC. Many of the locks now are run through computers, and if something breaks, you can't wait 4 or 5 hours for someone from OMS to get down there to fix it. And so I would recommend, too, that we look at putting the IT department back under DOC so they would have someone at every facility to deal with situations. The other thing, the big thing, would be dealing with cell phones. And as we look at cell phones, a lot of times we look at, well, let's put some jammers. We can't do that because of FCC. FCC doesn't allow states or locals to jam. They can do it at the federal level in certain circumstances. But there is a technology to manage your cellular access where they can, instead of jamming the signal, they can run the signal through a relay station there at the prison itself. The relay station captures all the calls. It acts as simply sort of like its own mini tower that when you make a call, it's relayed to another tower. It captures all those signals, and only those phones that have been registered can have their calls forwarded on. Everything else is held. So if the officers, the staff, emergency personnel have registered their phones, they make a call in the facility, it will be forwarded on. If it is a cell phone that is contraband, it won't be forwarded on. This is one of the biggest problems we saw earlier this year, a contraband ring where a gang was running its drug empire out of the prison through the cell phones. And it took a collaborative effort of both federal and state local officials to break that. But the cell phone contraband is a big problem. Here's one way, again, if IT was back under DOC, it's something that they could probably do and do very feasible and easily. The other thing I would say that we could look at to improve morale and efficiencies there is, besides putting IT in the modular thing, is to simply look at the medical parole process. 20 years ago, there were 85 people over 50 in the prisons. Today, there's over 5,000 people over 50 in the prisons. The medical cost for the geriatric class rises significantly. prison is the only place where you get free medical help. So they are required by federal law to treat any malady that a person has in prison. They cannot ignore it, and it must be treated. In fact, the federal lawsuit we got into a couple decades ago was over that and mandated that we keep, especially medical personnel, at a higher, at 80% rate, I believe. So one of our medical costs is one of our parameters that are climbing rapidly and is a huge cost factor for DOC. Being able to contain that, put someone who's 70 years old, is on dialysis in a wheelchair, is not going to be much of a threat to society. Giving them a medical parole is not much of a threat to society. So those are some things that we could do. We're going to also look at Jackie Schweitzer is going to do a little presentation about the change in uniform that many of the officers that we contacted in a survey we did seem to indicate this would be what they would like to do. After that, we would have comments from Director Albaugh. Hopefully by then, Representative Osborne will be here to talk about increase in pay. Of course, that would be the one great thing we could do, but we know that this next coming year is probably going to be just as physically challenging as it was this last year. But it's something that we can be looking forward to in the future and begin preparing for. So with that, I'll turn this over to, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions? I just have one, because you opened it up saying this is going to reduce costs, but some of these new added ideas that you have, it would seem like it could increase the cost to DOC. So do you have some kind of a cost analysis?
The IT going under DOC would reduce their costs. Halfway houses going under DOC, I believe, because of the high recidivism under our present halfway house structure, would reduce costs. It wouldn't be something that they would have to do, like go out and buy something, but it'd be something that they could change in the present structure they're doing. The only thing that currently might add costs in the short run would be getting a master lease program. However, I think Director Albaugh has stated that about 20 cents out of every dollar now goes to help to fix something that just broke. I'll give you an example. We had 7 pods, I believe, at Lark, our maximum security, where prisoners are first taken to be assessed, and their locks didn't work. When you don't have locks working at a prison, that's a real problem. So that might have been a cost, but a far less cost than having maximum security prisoners having free reign in a facility. So the other on the cell phone would also reduce, could be done at minimal cost or at a reduced cost because of what you would save in terms of time saved having to do shakedowns, look for cell phones, contraband, sweeps, all those other things. So
it'll be interesting to see that cost-benefit analysis. So thank you.
And I think Representative Schweitzer has that with the uniforms.
Okay,
and I'm going to turn this over to him.
Right. If you'd like to sit down there, you're welcome to do that and adjust the microphone. And if you would, please identify yourself and who you're with, please.
Yes, he is abnormally not of average height, so we might adjust it a little bit.
And please feel free to sit down if you need to.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Schweitzer. I am currently a membership representative with Oklahoma Corrections Professionals. A little bit about myself. I hold degrees in criminal justice and human resources. Currently pursuing a doctorate in sociology at University of Oklahoma. What I'm here today is to present a proposal for DOC for consumption by the committee about some attitudes and some wishes of our members of officers in the Department of Corrections to help with the uniform situation. Currently, There are two types of, can we go to the next slide, please? There are two types of uniforms that the department uses for a duty station. I'm going to speak about those. I'm also going to speak about a new uniform idea, as well as some research that we conducted, and then I'll speak about how this can save costs for the department, as well as some statistics from our research. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, currently the Department of Corrections utilizes two styles of duty uniform. That's the Class B and Class C. Those designations aren't really important. They're just what we call them in policy. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the standard Class B uniform. I apologize, some of this text looks like it got pretty small, but I'm sure everyone has seen this uniform. This is the public-facing uniform that the department uses. Anybody who works in a central control position or a visitation or transportation, any position that's going to have routine contact with the public, is instructed by policy to wear this uniform. It is comprised of basically a dress uniform shirt, dress pants with stripes, a leather belt, and then various patches and insignia. All of that is provided by the department. What the employee themselves provide is a white t-shirt, duty boots, and then occasionally miscellaneous equipment like a key holder or a flashlight ring. Policy itself says that these items are supposed to be department issue only. Unfortunately, due to budget crunches and not always being able to make that happen, it's not always the case. If we can go on to the next slide, as I mentioned, this uniform is required for certain positions and posts. The Security Administration, which means Chief of Security of all levels, Correctional Security Manager 2, which is a captain, are required to wear this uniform. Before, when we had the work centers, work center chiefs of security could wear the other uniform that I'm going to speak about. I honestly don't know if that's still the case with OSR, being the new work center. But the other positions, such as visitation officer, central control officer, and the transport officer, those officers going to work a hospital shift, are required to wear this uniform. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This uniform has some issues. First off, it's a piece of dress wear, and with that, it takes a lot of work to keep this uniform looking professional. Part of that issue is when you're in a prison, you're bending down, you're reaching up over your head, you're moving constantly. Even in these public-facing positions, you are patting down offenders, you are doing searches, reaching around, up in, crawling inside stuff to try to find contraband, and, well, imagine trying to do that in a shirt and dress pants. It's not easy. So, in order to try to maintain a professional image, some officers end up spending more of their personal money purchasing extra items to help. Shirt garters, which attach to the bottom of the shirt and to the sock to help keep it tucked in. Collar stays, which help keep the collar flat, are all things that can be purchased by officers, and often are, to try to keep that professional image. If we go to the next slide, you can see that some of the common complaints that we've heard, that I've experienced myself while I was an officer with the department, is that this uniform is plain uncomfortable. Going to work every single day in something that basically reminds you that you're wearing it does not help with morale. These materials, they do not handle seasonal weather well. They're hot in the summer, they're cold in the winter. As I mentioned, the uniform shirt does become untucked when utilizing the full range of motion. And as mentioned as well, the shirt garters can be used to help alleviate that issue. They, however, are also very uncomfortable. In fact, when I had to use them myself, I would constantly get rashes because of the metal clips on them rubbing against my skin. If we can go to the next slide, this is the other uniform that members of the department, officers, wear. This uniform is BDU. It's a military or paramilitary type uniform. It is 50% cotton, 50% polyester, and there are multiple styles of this uniform that are worn. Provided by the department is the jacket and the uniform pants, the six-pocket pants, and then once again patches and insignia. Once again provided by the employee is the navy blue t-shirt, boots, and sometimes miscellaneous equipment. On the next slide, you'll see that this uniform, once again, with the exception of those positions which are public-facing, this tends to be worn by officers on the yard, officers which their duties will not require them to be inside housing units or to have contact with the public. Recently, within the past year or two, many facilities have been limiting the use of this uniform in favor of the Class B uniform for everybody except yard officers. Once again, which are those officers who their duties require them to stay outside. On the next slide, you'll also see that this uniform, it's honestly not as hard to maintain a professional appearance. There are additional items which these officers wearing this uniform can use. Pant blousers, which are a little band that fits around the bottom of the leg, can be used in lieu of sticking the pants in the boots. That's very uncomfortable to have your pants stuck in your boots to blouse them, but that is the proper way to wear this uniform. Now, this uniform itself, in order to stay looking professional, requires a lot of time in starching and pressing. On the next slide, however, we've also got some common complaints for this uniform, and that's that this uniform tends to lose its color very quickly. It fades. It does not require dry cleaning. It's normally washed in a washer and dryer. But doing so, once again, over the course of 6 months will render a uniform not the correct color anymore. From experience, I can say that unless these uniforms are purchased from a reputable manufacturer like Galls or Proper, one of the national brands, they tend to fall apart very quickly. I know that for a while the department was purchasing the BDU uniforms from OCI. I can relate a story where I received new uniforms and had to request new uniforms the next week because they'd already fallen apart. That's not cost effective at all. The other issue is that this uniform, with the jacket, with the pants, is somewhat bulky. In the position of a DOC officer where at any point you can get into a confrontation with an offender, this uniform can become a hindrance. It offers plenty of places for an offender or an inmate to grab a hold of. That's not a good thing when you're in a fight. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, these uniforms have multiple variations. Long sleeve shirts, short sleeve shirts for both the Class B and C. The BDU jackets can have 4 pockets or 2 pockets, and both the 4-pocket and 2-pocket have different styles of wear. For instance, you are supposed to tuck in the 2-pocket shirts with wearing a duty belt, which is the nylon belt. And then also during the summer, there is no requirement to wear a jacket from a certain period of time. On the next slide, you'll also see that there are two additional types of uniforms, and we are not proposing to change either of these uniforms. The honor guard wears a specific uniform, which is the Class B uniform with additional dress items, spats, the strap. Basically, it's meant to be parade dress. And then our CERT teams, our emergency response teams, wear a black version of the BDU uniform. So with that being said, our proposal is that we want DOC to adopt a single duty uniform to get rid of Class B and Class C and all the variations. And the uniform that I'm going to propose will meet the needs of a professional appearance, as well as being comfortable, durable, and as I'll show later, a cost savings for the department. We're not proposing any change to headgear, to boots, to the footwear. And also, this proposal does not require a legislative action to take effect. This can be accomplished through internal policy change within the department. Before I go on, I'm going to ask Gus to help me pass out some samples that I have here. Thank you. What I'm handing out here are some actual uniform pieces from the proposed uniform, as well as some insignia pieces that are not currently used. If we can go on to the next slide there, I'll be able to.
Can I just ask a question? So if we're going to, I mean, this is something that DOC internally will decide, nothing that the legislature needs to do. But what's the cost if you have to replace all the uniforms that are currently being used by the corrections officers now?
That will actually come inside my cost proposal, the cost savings analysis.
Okay.
The proposed uniform is a tactical polo with a pair of tactical pants, as well as a inner and outer duty belt, and then various insignia and patches, as well as providing a jacket that will work with the uniform. On the next slide here is where our research came into play. Now, in order for us to propose this, I wanted to know, what do the officers of the department want? What do staff members feel needs to change in order to improve their morale? To do that, we conducted a survey, tried to reach as many officers as possible. Unfortunately, it was only several hundred that we reached. On the next slide, you'll see here that we asked whether our respondent was a uniformed employee, whether they were currently an employee of the department, and we were going to ask to rate and respond, or choose and rate different aspects of the current uniforms and our proposed uniform. On the next slide, you can see that our survey was fully completed by 201 respondents, and then we had an additional 156 answer part of the survey. The next slide, and I'm sorry, that is really small. 284 of our respondents were current employees of the Department of Corrections, and an additional 19 were former employees.
Mr. Switzer, thank you. Would it be all right, because we have a conflict in a scheduling with the director, if you could suspend your presentation for a few moments and we'll go to Director Alba? Would that be, could you stay beyond?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Switzer. Director Alba, we know you have a busy, tight schedule. I appreciate you being here today. So
this time, if you don't mind, Madam Chairwoman.
Absolutely.
I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to talk about, but I've updated a slide presentation that you saw last week, and I think it's, and Representative Billy saw it as well. But all these things, the bottom line, they cost money. I'm aware of the uniform problem. I'm trying to address the uniform problem. We have problems with our inmate dress, which is unacceptable. We had a walk away last night, and given our current dress, he blended in with the trees around, and law enforcement couldn't pick him up. I just stepped out to take a call. He was picked up, so he's back in custody. But all these things cost money. I don't particularly like the uniform that officers have, but it is what it is right now. We just unfortunately have a ton of pressure points throughout the department to take care of, and I'm trying to knock them off one at a time. Let me quickly go through this slide presentation because I think it's some new information will enlighten members as to where we are. Last week, for those of you who were here, you probably saw this slide that shows the inmate growth. While is a pretty sharp increase, while our staffing numbers continue to decline, as Gus alluded to. Our turnover rate for 2015, our entire population of employees at DOC was 26.84%. We cannot sustain that as an agency going forward. And for the same year, 2015, our CO turnover rate was 37.25%, and this year we're at 39%. Next slide, please. This one really is shocking that over the last 5 years, our growth in admissions has approached and even exceeded now 20%. That means people that we're accepting down at Lexington Assessment Receiving Center, those numbers are just going through the roof, which also explains why we have a large number, over 1,700 in County Jail backup today. We can't accept everybody that's knocking down our door to come in. We just don't have the place to put them. Drugs are the most common offense in these admissions at a rate of 31%. They've grown by themselves, the drugs, since 2011, 22%, just that category alone. And 81% of these newcomers have no prior violent crime whatsoever. Slide 4, please. We've got similar rates to a couple of our surrounding states. You can see that violent crime and property crime down since 2011, but our incarceration rate due to our statutes affects our population still. Slide 5, please. This gives us an idea of our current staffing rates across 5 categories: correctional officers, pardon, parole, or probation and parole officers, medical staff, other staff, and the total staff, actually 4 areas. We have in-house 5,238 employees that are authorized by our own structure. We're only capable, due to budgetary concerns, to fill 75% of those, 3,955 people. We have 282 probation and parole officer slots, and as of October 3rd, we have 255 of those filled, which means that their workload is in excess of 120 packets per person, since we have in excess of 32,000 that are under supervision outside incarceration. We have slots for 2,494 correctional officers. We're only filled at 1,721 as of October 3rd, which is 72% of those that we authorize in-house due to our staffing, or designed by our staffing needs and structure. The good news the last several months, we've really gotten a hold of our overtime. It's down by 6%, which is 6% over last year, and that equates to money.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Now, as you know, December 1st, federal government's changing the Fair Labor Standard Practices, which effectively doubles the salary cap on those that are now eligible. So I expect going forward, unless Congress does something, we will see, not only in our agency, but throughout state government, a severe spike in overtime cost. We're one of the agencies that runs 24/7, 365. And since we cannot fill all of our slots, which is recruitment, and we recruit as often and as rifle shot as we can make it pinpoint, we're still unsuccessful because of the pay rate. Our cadets start at $22.14 a month. I believe that's correct. $22.14 a month. And anyone in the department who makes less than $23,850 qualifies for food stamps for a family of 4, which also equates to about 37% of our agency. I'm not saying they do, I'm just saying they're eligible. Next slide, please. This is North Fork Correctional Facility. This is a prison. This was designed and built as a prison, unlike the vast majority of the facilities we utilize. This is a state-of-the-art in our system that we have. This is the facility that I negotiated a lease with CCA some time back. The board agreed. And there are 9 housing units at this facility, just south of Sayre. And as of last night, we were about 1,750 individuals. It's a medium prison. And we're going slowly because we're making sure that in our reclassification process we are putting minimums in minimum facilities and mediums in medium facilities. This helps with our workload insofar the correctional officers, the burden that they have moving people around. It helps with our unit managers. It helps with our case managers to have a facility like this. There's another one in the state I'd love to have, but money's going to dictate that. We have closed and consolidated all the work centers, as you know. That population was roughly 1,300 and has essentially been relocated to Granite, Oklahoma State Reformatory. And now those individuals have access to every program that we offer in the department. Plus there's Career Tech and there's Correctional Industries available. We started out slow because less than 3% of those men, the 1,300 men, had access to any programs, so they were unaware of what was available to them. We've been pushing really hard on an outreach program on that campus to make sure that everybody knows, and the number of individuals joining classes increases every day. So it is serving its purpose to ultimately return that segment of the population back to society, and they be equipped with some education or some life skill, some training. For the most part, we're a system that is a warehouse for men and women. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the worst part, and the only answer to it is money. We're well over $1 billion at this point in capital needs, and we're approaching $2 billion. Yesterday, the Board of Corrections leaders, all 7 of them, actually I had 6 of the 7. Let's go to the next slide. We decided, the board decided to, and you can go to the next slide, we've already talked about that. We decided to step forward and utilize the 2.3% of the $141 million. It was 2.3%, wasn't it? Our share of the $141 million that was not allocated earlier. I could have purchased 4 boilers at a cost of $2.5 million each and eaten up that $10.164 million that we were given. But it's been so long since we've actually been able to invest in our employees. My recommendation to the board was to adopt a plan that would take care of the inequities that were presented as a result of the implementation of Senate Bill 2131 2 years ago, and that affected 8 classifications of employees. So we're going to spend about almost $400,000 of that $10.1 million to correct those inequities in those 8 classifications. And essentially the balance of the $10.1 million, the board made the decision yesterday to give everyone except one person, everyone $1,750 one-time stipend. I've met with many leaders, met with the governor, Ken Miller. Everybody's, paranoid about the budget situation. I fully understand it. But given the tight situation we have with the budget as a state, our discussions with the board ended up being, if we didn't take this opportunity to do it now, we may not have it for 2 or 3 years. Who knows what the economy is going to do. So thankfully and unanimously, the board did adopt that, and the goal is to make those inequities in 2131 effective this payroll, October's payroll, the end of the month. And that affects 104 people, 108 people in our agency out of 3,900 plus. And then we'll work with OMES over the next month, and the goal is to present in a separate run the check, the one-time stipend, the Friday before Thanksgiving. I think that's a good time for people to be able to plan. Plus, as you know, insurance premiums are going up. At our department, it's anywhere from 8 to 14%. And without some type of an accommodation, that means that every employee at the Department of Commerce takes a pay cut. Less take home, less disposable income. So you can see the effect of 2131 that drove our initial discussion, that 36% didn't receive any pay increase, and that basically reflects anything that has been done agency-wide since October 1st, 2006, over 10 years. 23% of that staff 2 years ago received a 6.25%, and then correctional officers, 41%, thereabouts, and a few others received 8%. So we're trying to balance out the inequities. Let's go to the next slide. That essentially explains how we approach this hopefully wise use of money, investment in our employees. I guess is right. Our toughest job is not only recruitment, but it's training and it's retention. We're having a difficult time in the medical arena recruiting all levels of medical staff because it's a remote place, number one, but our pay is so out of whack with what the medical universe does. We just aren't competitive at all. We've now been operating Sayre North Fork since July 5th, and as of yet, we cannot entice full-time physician, and we need several full-time physicians out at Sayre. And it becomes more acute the larger the population grows. Capacity at the North Fork is 2,599, so you can see at 1,750 we're getting close. The department's done a great job in classification of population, of making sure we're putting in the right type of inmate in the right type of a bed. I know a lot of people bellyache about our private prisons, but I'll say again, if they weren't here, we would really be sunk. We halfway houses, 3 major prisons, county jail contracts. It's about 7,500 beds. And then you add the county jail backup of another 1,750 individuals needing a bed. We're at 9,000 beds. That doesn't exist in our system that we need today if we were to bring all the private contract beds in-house. So we have a chore ahead of us, and the incarceration rate keeps going up, and we have no place to put them. Let's go to the last slide, and you can see the breakout of our private contracts in those 4 areas. We put the county jail back up as one of our 4 corner posts in this arena, and the reason we do that is that the taxpayer is paying a rate of $27 a day for those in county jail backup. The average over the last 2 months has been $800,000 a month of taxpayer money going to county jails to support those individuals that are in that backup queue. I don't like it, but it is the way it is. I'll be happy to answer any questions. That's just a thumbnail sketch of kind of where we are at this point.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions from members of the committee?
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Okay. Thank you for letting me sit down. And I don't know that I've been on target today with what this interim committee is supposed to talk about, but I do know that our morale is it's okay. It's not great, but I think we're on the right glide path. We've ended the abuse of working doubles. I'd love to get everybody to 8-hour shifts, but some facilities we can't fill those slots to relieve that burden. So some facilities are working 12-hour shifts. I don't like that, but I think we're doing the best that we can. I hope the board's action yesterday will demonstrate the recognition and acknowledgement by the board of the hard work that employees put forward in keeping the public safe. So, yes, we could be doing better. We strive to do better every day, and a lot of these things are out of our control, but they are the first line of defense in the law enforcement arena. It's very difficult to train young men and young women to go behind the wall, and they're thinking X, and it turns out to be Y. So we lose a lot of our newbies right off the bat because they watch TV and they think it's a wonderful life. It is a wonderful life if your heart and your mind's committed to it, but it's tough. Every minute of every hour that they are on duty, their life is at risk. And I don't like it one bit, but it is a necessary evil in our society that we incarcerate people who have broken our laws. And I'm hopeful that the governor's criminal justice task force will bring forward to the members of the legislature this next session some ideas to help reduce our incarceration rate, because a large part of our population ought to be in local programs interdicting those problems, again, back on drugs, instead of shipping them across the state to facilities that ought to be closed, quite frankly, because of their inadequacies, their age, their inefficiencies, additional cost to taxpayers. And the most disturbing part for me is that when we ship them across state, because there is a bed available somewhere, it severs that family connection and that support group of those individuals, and those are the folks who need it the most. So thank you for letting me come back.
Thank you, Director.
Can't wait till we do it again.
We have one member that wants to say something.
Representative Billy, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to say I have several friends and a lot of constituents that have worked for DOC for years, and I can tell you just in the last probably 6-7 months, the conversation has really moved in a very positive direction in terms of morale, in terms of even if some changes haven't happened yet, the hope of we have some good things coming down the pipe. I can hear that in the conversations and just in my opportunities of being in the prison as a volunteer. I'm seeing and hearing that, and I want to commend you and thank you. And I also want to say I really appreciate the responsiveness of your staff. I've not had that experience in the past in terms of when I have constituent needs or issues happening, I get immediate response of what can we do to make this better. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I know that it's a tough job, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Representative Billy. This is not me. This is the 3,900 people who work and make it happen. I just happen to be the hired gun at the moment, and I believe that we all exist for a reason, and that reason is to make a difference. And I've been fortunate in my life to have experience at various levels, and as I mention often, corrections is not only a listing ship, it is a sinking ship. And I'm hoping that some of our corrective actions that we've taken over the last several months have put us on the right glide path. And don't shoot my profile, please. That's the ugliest part of me. But it is, I appreciate your sentiment, but it is, I'm glad to hear people are noticing that. It's hard for me to gauge that. I'm out in the yard a lot. I'm worried about the temperature of our population, and we've depopulated some of these temporary beds that has really helped on population control. But until we get a handle on the rate that are coming in to our facility, men and women, I'm afraid you're just going to see me next session going, help, help, help. So, and I deal my cards on top of the table. I'll tell you how it is, and it's not all pretty, but we are making some gains, and I appreciate the public recognizing that.
Well, I want to thank you personally, too, because I won't be here next session, but I want to say what a privilege it's been working with you and the accessibility. I reiterate what Representative Billy said. You came to my office immediately upon getting the directorship to communicate with the legislature, and that's been very, very helpful, I think, in all of our understanding of how everything works in DOC. And, we've passed some bills this year that November 1st will go into effect. Hopefully that some of that might trickle down to affect your population. And I think we're at a different place now in the legislature where people are educated enough to know that we need to be more smart on crime and make sure that the most violent offenders are put in prison and not those that can be rehabilitated.
Well, and I appreciate everybody, all members here, because you're part of that leadership that helped make those things happen. And it's easy to be tough on crime and lock them up and throw away the key, but that has a huge, not only human cost, but a financial cost and now burden to the Oklahoma taxpayer. And we have to be smarter about how we step up and recognize the changes in society and address them in a different way. So I'm leaving, and
thank you.
That's the end of my speech.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Switzer, you can come back and complete your presentation on the uniforms. Mr. Switzer is the OCP Membership Director.
That's great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to resume here. I guess I'll jump back in. That's one of the things of being an officer. I know we've got to be flexible, so we all are. Where I left off was our research. We had 284 respondents who are current employees of the Department of Corrections and 19 who were former employees. If we could go to the next slide here, you'll see that 255 of those respondents either are currently or were uniformed security staff. So we've got a somewhat decent sample for a voluntary survey here of people who wear these uniforms on a daily basis. The next slide will show that when asked which one of those uniforms were worn by the respondents who were uniformed officers, the layout was basically half and half between the dress uniform and the BDU. That is actually changing over time because we've got more facilities that are going to only the Class B uniforms, the dress uniforms. On the next slide here, wow, these are super small tables. I apologize for that. The caption for the question read, "Do you believe that a single duty uniform would be an improvement for the department?" It did surprise me when I got back that 74% of our respondents said that it would be either a small or a huge improvement. That's telling. It means they're looking for change. On our next slide here, what we did was we asked our respondents to rate the current and the proposed uniform 3 different ways. That was for professionalism, for comfort, and then overall. And that was on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. 69%, or close to 69% of our respondents rated our proposed uniform at 5 stars for professionalism. For the current uniforms, the ratings were 21% and 20% respectively at the maximum rating. Moving on to comfort, you can see that 78.5%, so almost 80% of our respondents said that they felt this new uniform would be comfortable to work in, so which would lead to an increased morale. For the Class B uniform, less than 3% told us that it was the most comfortable they've ever worn, or 5 stars. And that's compared to 35.5% for the BDU uniforms. That's a pretty big gap there. Overall, on the next slide, you can see that, once again, we had almost 74% of our respondents that rated our proposed uniform at 5 stars. The 5-star ratings for the Class B uniform were just over 5% and around 27% for the Class C. Basically what all this boils down to is our current employees who are wearing these uniforms have a very low opinion of the uniforms we're wearing, and Director Albaugh commented on that during his presentation, that they're just not very good uniforms. If we can go on to the next slide here. To kind of top it all off, we asked our respondents if they would like to see a change in required uniforms. We got a 92% yes. If we move on to the next slide, I'll finally get into the fiscal impact of our proposal here. The cost of our proposed uniform, and this is a whole lot of numbers, but what it boils down to, providing 4 uniforms per officer with tactical polo, the tactical pants, both an inner and outer duty belt, which are not provided for officers currently, magnetic nameplate, all the patches, and then something that has not been utilized within the department before, which is that embroidered rank strip. There were a couple of examples put out of different colors and materials. The cost ranges from a minimum of $559.47 to $591.57 per officer. Now that does seem like a lot of money, because I see this eyebrows going up. Absolutely it does. But let's move on to the next slide. This is our current cost to send a cadet to the academy. What we give to the cadets before they go to the academy is 3 Class B uniforms. That's the dress uniform. That's 3 uniform shirts, pants, a coat, a belt, the nameplates, badges, insignia, all of that types of stuff. And the cost is higher than providing 4 of these uniforms to each officer. On the next slide, we'll go to the lowest cost option for an officer that has graduated from the academy. Keep in mind, a lot of facilities are moving away from this. What the lowest cost option is by policy is 1 Class B uniform, that's 1 dress uniform, and 4 sets of the Class C, which is the BDU uniform. The minimum cost for an officer there is $669.67. That goes up to just over $692 for the maximum for large sizes. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about what the current cost is for officers who are working at facilities that receive 5 Class Bs, which there are multiple facilities doing this. Joseph Harp, Lexington, 2 that come to mind right off the top of my head. You can see here that the cost is substantially higher than the others, up to a maximum of $865 per officer. Now this is to outfit. And as we know, uniforms are an ongoing cost. When a uniform wears out, an officer has to request a new uniform just to be able to do their job. So if we go to the breakdown on the next page, what I've done is take the 4 slides that I showed you, providing uniforms to a cadet, the lowest cost for an officer after they've come out of the academy, and the current standard practice. And you can see here that changing this uniform, now over time, obviously it's not something we can do all at once without a lot of money on hand, but the cost savings range up to about $50 per cadet and up to almost $275 per officer. Doesn't seem like a lot of money until you realize we have over 1,000 officers, more than that, to outfit every year. If we can move on to the next slide. There were some statistics that we pulled in our research for these uniforms. Of those departments that responded to a request for information, and there's a better breakdown in the packets that you guys were given, 12 departments in the country are currently utilizing a polo-style uniform for at least some institution employees. I'd like to draw your attention to number 3 and number 8, that's Idaho and Nebraska, who have moved to a single-duty uniform very similar to what we're proposing. The representatives from those agencies that I spoke with told me that it has been a very positive change for them, both in cost and morale. I will move on to my last slide here. Wow, that is tiny. Another piece of information that we were able to pull out of our research was facial hair for officers. Now, it's not necessarily incidental to my proposal, but I thought it was interesting to see. Currently in Oklahoma, no facial hair other than a mustache is allowed for correctional officers. That's the same way for a whole 13, including Oklahoma, of the departments that responded. Half of the country, 25, which that may be more because we did have some departments that did not respond to our request, do allow controlled facial hair for their officers, which they have also told me has been a morale boost at zero cost. My last slide there has just got a little bit of information about OCP and where to go to get a copy of the proposal that the committee was provided with. In closing, what I'd like to say is, throughout my tenure with the department as an officer, being in uniform, I know that it's been a constant struggle to maintain a professional appearance when working all of the time, and we know our officers work all of the time. Being a professional law enforcement officer is half about how you do the job and half about how you see yourself doing the job. Maintaining a professional appearance directly affects how you perform. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Switzer from the members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
This time, I'd like to recognize Representative Osborne. He's going to be talking about the implementation of automatic pay increases through pay bands and step increases. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. And several of you in the room may remember that 3 or 4 years ago I had run a bill after we'd had a remuneration study done with Lucinda Meltebargers, who I worked with, the head of Human Capital Resource Management at OMS, about how horribly underpaid our state employees are. And, you know, a lot of times the media picks up a lot on teacher salaries, but I think we often forget our 30,000 state employees and how horribly they're paid and how in the world we can expect to have retention and have people want to stay, do their jobs, move up the ranks, and dig in. It's impossible with this kind of pay scale. So we implemented the first year of a 4-year plan. What it did was took the lowest hanging fruit from all of the 70 appropriated agencies and started the route to get everybody to 90% of private sector pay. Unfortunately, we implemented the first year. It passed handily in the House and Senate, signed by the governor, and the oil and gas market fell through the floor. Obviously, we had to put that on hold, but it is my intention to file legislation this year to restart that journey. Unfortunately, we're going to have to start back at square one again because of the increases we've seen in things like benefits for state employees, but it is absolutely not acceptable to have state employees on food stamps. We expect our state employees to take care of the core services of the state. That is the job of government. A lot of times people wonder why we're up here. Our job is to take in the correct amount of taxation and to implement core services effectively and efficiently, period. And at the end of the day, we are not able to do that if we have high turnover rates and we cannot attract the best and keep them when we do get them. So my intention is to refile that legislation this year. We are coming out of the slump. We're not going to be back to stable yet, but we are definitely on the road out. The numbers are looking much better than they were last year with the $1.3 billion shortfall. If we do not start this journey now, when are we ever going to have the impetus to start it? So I've been working with OPEA, with Sterling Zierle. I've been working with former Representative Gus Blackwell, Oklahoma Corrections Professionals, and with OMS and Lucinda Meltebarger, head of Human Capital Resource Management. That bill will be filed this year. We are looking at possibilities of what it would cost to implement it in a 1, 2, 3, or 4-year plan to see what we can do this first year. If we can't do quite as much this first year, and then we could maybe more heavily expedite the next year according to budget woes. But every dollar we spend on state employee pay raises pays for itself. The constant retraining, the constant lack of morale is not acceptable, and I just wanted to at least put out there that that bill is being drafted as we speak. I've spoken to the executive branch about it, the Senate, and we already have a Senate author. We are absolutely going to continue that journey. So, and I would take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Osborne. Are there any questions? Well, thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. Representative Bennett, this is your study, and you get the final say.
I didn't realize that Representative Osborne was so much taller than I was until I got to the microphone here. It's the shoes, yes. You know, there's a saying out there that says that my future, our children's future is directly dependent upon the people that show up. So to the members that showed up today, Madam Chair, I thank you for having this study in your committee, and all the other folks that showed up as well. I'd like to specifically thank Representative Gus Blackwell, or former Representative Blackwell, and he left the room. I guess he didn't want to hear what I have to say. And I really appreciate and echo what Representative Billy said about you said about Director Albaugh earlier. He's been very easy to work with. To be quite honest, I had a very hard time. I'm the chairman of the Public Safety Appropriations and Budget Committee. Had a hard time getting into the door and seeing the director of DOC, the former director, and which has led to some of these issues that we have today as far as funding goes, because without them working with us in the legislature, we don't know what the needs are. However, Director Albaugh has done that, and we greatly appreciate him for having that open door and coming to us as well. I appreciate Mr. Switzer for coming today and giving your remarks. And I agree 100% with you. Being a Marine for 21 years, how you look and how professional you feel is how you act. And if we can't give them the money that they need or the money that we should be giving to them, at a minimum, at least we can do is try to make them feel better about doing their job. You know, I jokingly said to one of the DOC employees a while back, I said, you know, I could fix this problem about the prisons being overcrowded. Pretty simple. We could fix two problems. We could create jobs and take care of this overpopulated prison system. Of course, I'm kind of militant. I think we should take all that open area that we have out in western Oklahoma, and Gus Blackwell would be happy about this because it would create jobs in his area. Let's employ these veterans that we have coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that need jobs. Put some concertina wire around there and give the veterans a gun and tell them if they leave the wire, then shoot them. I think that would deter a lot of people from going to prison, that's for sure. We could even give them pink jumpsuits like the Sheriff Joe Parole did in Arizona. That may be a little militant, so I'll get back on the subject of what we can do to help our corrections folks out. Like Representative Osborne said a while ago, public safety is a core function of government. There's no doubt about that, and it's not a talking point, and it sounds kind of cliche, but that is our responsibility. Being a police officer myself, I understand that responsibility, and it's not something that I take lightly. And it's obviously something that these correction officers are not taking very lightly either. It's something they enjoy doing. It's something they put their heart and soul into. And for us to not pay them for the job that they're doing is really unsatisfactory. And that's one of the reasons that we're having this interim study today. And hopefully we can come out with some really good legislation and help fix some of these issues. Because here's the bottom line, the public safety that we owe to our citizens as legislators, making sure that public safety is a core function of government. If we don't take care of those correction officers in these prisons, that front line is no longer there. So now that means they're back out into the public. So not only is it a public safety issue for the general public, it's a public safety issue for those officers on the front line. And if we don't take care of them, they can't take care of us. And that is the bottom line. Just like Director Albaugh said, and maybe that's why I like him so much, he's a straight shooter. And I am too. And that's the way it has to be. We need to get away from the political correctness and just call it what it is and stand up and take care of the responsibilities that we owe to the public and to these officers that are creating that public safety environment that we need. Anytime you have one officer, I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, but one officer to probably every 40 or 50 inmates is a huge public safety issue to us and to those officers. And we cannot do that. We cannot put them in those situations because really what happens, and no fault of the officer, is the prisoners start running the prisons. And that's a bad thing. It's a very bad thing, and if we ever had a prisoner uprising, and I pray that we never do, then I think we will see the catastrophic outcome of that, and we can't put these officers in that type of environment. With all the information that you got today, and there's so much more information out there, we have so much more to give to you. I just ask for the members that are here and for the public that's here as well, let's get behind these officers and let's get behind the legislation that's going to be coming forward, and let's support the Department of Corrections as well as our other public safety folks and make sure that we fund them as adequately as we can with the budget that we have, and make sure that we give them the support that they deserve and the respect that they need as we go forward. So I want to thank you all for showing up today. If you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to try to answer that for you or for anyone else. And I'll be happy to work with each and every one of you as we push forward and support Representative Osborne's legislation as well as any other legislation that might come outside of this study that we're having today.
Thank you, Representative Bennett. Are there any questions of Representative Bennett? Well, seeing none. Well, I want to thank everybody, members of this Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee. That was a new committee formed by Speaker Hickman, and I want to commend him for forming this committee because I think we've passed some good legislation that's come out of this committee in the last 2 years, and I want to thank all the members that were part of that to make that happen, and I hope it's an ongoing committee moving forward with the new speaker because as we've learned today with all the very informative presentations, this is a problem that we have in our state. We need to address it. And I just want to thank everybody for their participation today in this committee, as well as moving forward. I'm looking forward to hearing about great things that will be coming forth in this area. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.